The morning mist clung to the Philippine jungle like a shroud when Captain Joseph F. Walker first heard the distinctive whoosh of 60 rockets launching simultaneously from the modified Sherman tank behind him. The Japanese defenders in their reinforced bunker complex had no idea what was about to hit them. Within seconds, their entire world would explode in a hellstorm of fire and steel that would leave survivors stumbling from their positions in complete shock, forever changing how warfare was conducted in the Pacific. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The story of how America's most unlikely weapon system came to terrorize Japanese forces begins not in the heat of Pacific combat, but in the engineering workshops of Detroit in 1943. The M4 Sherman tank had never been designed for glamour or recognition. It was America's workhorse, built for reliability, mass production, and most importantly, adaptability. While German panzers boasted thicker armor and more powerful guns, the Sherman's greatest strength lay in its ability to be modified for countless specialized roles. Among the many strange and wonderful variants that emerged from American ingenuity, none was more bizarre or terrifying than the T34 Calliope. The weapon system that would eventually rain death on Japanese positions across the Pacific began as an experimental project to give American forces a mobile rocket artillery platform. Engineers mounted a rack containing 64.5-inch rocket tubes directly on top of the Sherman's turret, creating what looked like a massive pipe organ of destruction. The sight of the first prototype would have been almost comical, if not for its lethal potential. The rocket rack towered above the tank's normal profile, making it look top-heavy and ungainly. Critics questioned whether the modification would make the tank too vulnerable, too slow, or simply too awkward to be effective in combat. What they failed to understand was that the Calliope was never meant to engage in traditional tank-versus-tank warfare. It was designed for one specific purpose: delivering devastating area bombardment in situations where conventional artillery couldn't reach or wasn't effective enough. The weapon system got its nickname from the resemblance to a calliope, those steam-powered musical instruments found at circuses and carnivals. But there was nothing entertaining about what this mechanical beast could unleash. Each of the 60 tubes contained a 4.5-inch rocket capable of delivering high-explosive warheads across distances of up to 8,000 yards. When all 60 fired in rapid succession, they could blanket an area the size of several football fields with devastating explosions in less than 30 seconds. The rockets themselves were derivatives of the successful bazooka anti-tank weapon, scaled up for area bombardment rather than precision strikes against armored vehicles. Each warhead packed enough explosive power to demolish wooden structures, collapse earthworks, and create havoc among personnel caught in the open. More importantly, for Pacific operations, they were designed to penetrate into caves and tunnel systems before detonating, making them ideal weapons against the type of fortified positions Japanese crush forces favored. Training crews to operate the Calliope proved almost as challenging as developing the weapon itself. Tank commanders had to learn entirely new tactics, understanding when and how to deploy their devastating but limited ammunition supply. Unlike the tank's main gun, which carried dozens of rounds, the Calliope system could only fire its full complement once, before requiring a lengthy and dangerous reloading process that left the crew completely vulnerable. The reloading procedure was a nightmare of complexity and exposure. Crew members had to climb out of the relative safety of their armored vehicle and manually insert new rockets into each of the 60 tubes, while potentially under enemy fire. The process could take over an hour, even under ideal conditions, meaning the Calliope-equipped tanks typically withdrew from combat after expending their rocket load, rather than attempting to reload in the field. Despite these limitations, American commanders recognized the psychological impact the weapon could have on enemy forces. Intelligence reports from European operations where early Calliope variants had been tested showed that German troops frequently abandoned positions after being subjected to massive rocket barrages, even when the actual casualties were relatively light. The sheer shock and terror of 60 explosions happening simultaneously in a concentrated area proved to be as effective as the physical destruction the rockets caused. As American forces prepared for increasingly difficult operations against Japanese-held islands in the Pacific, the Calliope's unique capabilities became more appealing. Japanese defensive tactics relied heavily on fortified positions carved into caves, hidden in dense jungle, or built into coral and volcanic rock formations that made them nearly impervious to conventional artillery bombardment. These positions could hold up entire American advances for days or weeks, inflicting heavy casualties on attacking forces. The first Calliope-equipped Sherman tanks arrived in the Philippines in late 1944, as American forces under General MacArthur began their campaign to retake the islands from Japanese occupation. Among the officers designated to field test, the new weapon system was Captain Joseph F. Walker, a veteran tank commander who had already distinguished himself in previous Pacific operations. Walker's first impression of the Calliope was mixed. The modified Sherman looked ungainly and vulnerable, its rocket rack making it an obvious target for enemy artillery and aircraft. The added weight affected the tank's mobility, and the high profile made concealment difficult in the dense jumble terrain where much of the Philippine campaign would be fought. However, Walker was an experienced enough commander to recognize the weapon's potential impact on the type of fortified positions his forces regularly encountered. The Japanese defenders in the Philippines had been preparing for the American assault for months, building an extensive network of bunkers, caves, and tunnel systems throughout the islands. These positions were designed to withstand prolonged bombardment from naval guns and conventional artillery, with multiple entrances and exits allowing defenders to retreat deeper underground when under attack, then emerge to engage American forces once the bombardment lifted. Japanese military doctrine in the Pacific had evolved significantly since the early days of the war, when they still believed they could achieve decisive victories against American forces. By 1944, Japanese commanders understood they were fighting a delaying action, making each American advance as costly as possible, while hoping that mounting casualties would force the United States to negotiate a peace settlement rather than continue the bloody island-hopping campaign toward Baraf. Japan itself. The defensive positions in the Philippines represented the culmination of Japanese defensive engineering. Bunkers were built with multiple layers of logs, coral, and earth capable of withstanding direct hits from large-caliber naval guns. Cave systems were expanded and connected, creating underground complexes that could shelter hundreds of defenders while remaining virtually invisible to American reconnaissance. Supply depots were hidden deep underground, allowing Japanese forces to continue resistance even when completely cut off from outside support. Walker's first opportunity to test the Calliope system came during an assault on a Japanese stronghold near Manila. Intelligence reports indicated the position contained approximately 200 defenders dug into a hillside complex of caves and bunkers that commanded a crucial road junction. Previous attempts to reduce the position using conventional artillery and infantry assault had failed, with American forces taking heavy casualties while making minimal progress against the well-concealed defensive positions. The attack plan called for Walker's Calliope-equipped Sherman to approach within range of the Japanese positions under cover of smoke and supporting fire from conventional tanks and infantry. Once in position, the Calliope would deliver its full 60-rocket barrage against the hillside complex, followed immediately by an infantry assault while the defenders were still stunned and disoriented from the bombardment. The morning of the attack, Walker positioned his tank at the edge of a clearing approximately 6,000 yards from the target area. The Japanese positions were barely visible, even through binoculars, appearing as dark shadows and suspicious-looking vegetation on the heavily forested hillside. Intelligence had identified several bunker positions and cave entrances, but Walker knew from experience that many more defensive positions remained hidden and would only reveal themselves once the shooting started. As supporting units laid down covering fire and smoke screens, Walker's crew prepared the Calliope system for firing. The process required precise calculations of range, wind speed, and target coordinates to ensure the rockets would impact in the intended area. Unlike the tank's main gun, which could be adjusted after each shot, the Calliope would deliver all its firepower in one massive barrage, with no opportunity for correction. The moment Walker gave the firing command, his world exploded in sound and fury. 60 rockets launched in rapid succession, each one creating a brilliant flash and thunderous roar as it left its tube. The launch sequence lasted less than 10 seconds, but the noise was so intense that crew members reported temporary hearing loss despite wearing protective equipment. Smoke and flame from the rocket motors completely obscured the tank's vision, leaving Walker momentarily blind to the results of his bombardment. What the Japanese defenders experienced was beyond anything they had encountered in 3 years of Pacific warfare. The first rockets began impacting while the last ones were still leaving their tubes, creating a rolling thunder of explosions that seemed to go on forever. The carefully constructed bunkers that had withstood months of conventional bombardment began collapsing as rockets penetrated through camouflage and detonated inside defensive positions. Several rockets penetrated directly into cave entrances, their explosions amplified by the enclosed spaces and creating devastating overpressure that killed or wounded defenders throughout the underground complex. Others impacted against the hillside itself, creating landslides that buried additional positions and blocked escape routes that had been carefully planned as part of the defensive system. The psychological impact proved even more devastating than the physical destruction. Japanese soldiers, who had endured massive naval bombardments and sustained artillery attacks, found themselves facing something entirely outside their previous experience. The simultaneous nature of the rocket impacts created a level of shock and disorientation that left many defenders unable to function effectively, even if they survived the initial barrage uninjured. Walker watched through his periscope as the hillside seemed to come alive with explosions, smoke, and flying debris. Trees that had provided concealment for Japanese positions were shredded or completely destroyed, revealing bunkers and caves that intelligence had never identified. Secondary explosions indicated that some of the rockets had found ammunition storage areas or other important targets within the defensive complex. Even before the smoke had completely cleared, American infantry began their assault on the shattered Japanese positions. What they found was unlike anything they had encountered in previous attacks against similar fortifications. Instead of organized resistance from prepared positions, they met scattered groups of stunned and disoriented defenders, many of whom seemed unable to process what had just happened to their carefully constructed defensive alamah system. The few Japanese soldiers who attempted to organize resistance found that many of their weapons and equipment had been buried under debris or damaged by the rocket barrage. Communication between different parts of the defensive complex had been completely severed, leaving individual groups isolated and unable to coordinate their response to the American assault. Within hours, positions that had previously withstood weeks of conventional attack had been overrun by American forces. Word of the Calliope's devastating effectiveness spread quickly through both American and Japanese military channels. American commanders began requesting the modified tanks for their most difficult assault missions, while Japanese intelligence officers struggled to understand what new weapon had been deployed against their forces. Initial reports were so extraordinary that some Japanese officers dismissed them as exaggerated accounts from traumatized survivors. The truth became undeniable as more Calliope-equipped tanks entered service throughout the Philippine campaign. Japanese positions that had been considered nearly impregnable suddenly became vulnerable to a new form of attack that their defensive planning had never anticipated. The weapon's ability to deliver massive firepower in a very short time made it particularly effective against the type of prepared positions Japanese forces relied upon for their defensive strategy. One captured Japanese officer later described the experience of being subjected to a Calliope barrage as like being inside a thunderstorm where every lightning bolt struck the ground simultaneously. He reported that the sound alone was enough to cause temporary paralysis among his men, while the physical destruction made their carefully prepared defensive positions useless within minutes. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. Japanese military planners had based their entire Pacific defensive strategy on the assumption that well-constructed fortifications could hold up American advances long enough to make the cost of victory unacceptable. The Calliope's ability to rapidly neutralize these positions forced a complete reconsideration of defensive tactics and raised serious questions about whether effective resistance to American advances was still possible. Captain Walker and other Calliope commanders quickly learned to maximize the weapon's psychological impact by coordinating their attacks with other units. The most effective tactics involved using the Calliope barrage as part of a combined arms assault, with conventional artillery and airstrikes preceding the rocket attack to force Japanese defenders into their bunkers and caves where they would be most vulnerable to the penetrating effects of the rockets. The timing of follow-up infantry assaults proved crucial to the weapon's success. Walker discovered that attacking immediately after the rocket barrage, while defenders were still stunned and disoriented, produced the best results. Delaying the assault gave Japanese forces time to recover their composure and reorganize their defense, significantly reducing the effectiveness of the initial bombardment. Loading and maintaining the Calliope system presented unique challenges that required innovative solutions from American logistics personnel. Each rocket weighed over 20 pounds and required careful handling to prevent accidental detonation. Transportation to forward positions meant that supply convoys became high-priority targets for Japanese artillery and aircraft, since destroying a single ammunition truck could eliminate the offensive end capability of multiple Calliope tanks. The vulnerability of the Calliope during reloading operations led to the development of specialized tactics for withdrawing the tanks to safe areas after expending their rocket load. Commanders learned to position reloading sites well behind the front lines, with heavy security provided by infantry and conventional armor. The lengthy reloading process meant that Calliope tanks could typically only participate in one major engagement per day, limiting their overall impact on sustained operations. Despite these limitations, the weapon's effectiveness against Japanese defensive positions made it increasingly valuable as American forces encountered more sophisticated fortifications. Japanese engineers had been steadily improving their defensive techniques throughout the Pacific War, learning from each American assault to build stronger and better concealed positions. The Calliope represented a technological leap that temporarily restored American tactical advantages against these improved defenses. The production of Calliope systems never reached the levels that American commanders desired. The complex rocket rack assemblies required precision manufacturing that competed with other high-priority weapons programs. Additionally, the specialized nature of the weapon meant that crews required extensive training to operate the system effectively, further limiting the number of units that could be equipped with the modification. Each Calliope-equipped tank represented a significant investment in both equipment and training that commanders were reluctant to risk in situations where conventional weapons might be sufficient. This led to the development of careful procedures for identifying targets that justified the use of the specialized weapon system, with intelligence officers required to provide detailed assessments of Japanese defensive positions before Calliope attacks were approved. The Japanese military's inability to develop an effective countermeasure to the Calliope highlighted the growing technological gap between American and Japanese forces by late 1944. While American industry continued to produce increasingly sophisticated weapons systems, Japanese manufacturing capacity was being steadily degraded by bombing attacks and resource shortages that made innovation increasingly difficult. Japanese attempts to modify their defensive tactics to counter the Calliope's effectiveness met with limited success. Spreading defensive positions over wider areas reduced the impact of concentrated rocket barrages, but also made the positions more vulnerable to conventional attacks and reduced the ability to concentrate defensive fire against American assaults. Deeper underground positions provided better protection against rocket penetration, but required more time and resources to construct, while offering fewer opportunities to engage attacking forces. The most effective Japanese response proved to be targeting the Calliope tanks themselves before they could deliver their devastating barrages. The weapon's distinctive silhouette made it easily identifiable to Japanese observers, who learned to call for immediate artillery and mortar fire whenever a Calliope-equipped tank was spotted approaching their positions. However, American combined arms tactics usually provided enough suppressive fire to protect the Calliope during its brief firing sequence. As the Philippine campaign progressed, Walker and other Calliope commanders refined their tactics to maximize the weapon's impact while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. The most successful approaches involved using terrain features and smoke screens to conceal the tank's approach, then rapidly deploying to firing positions for quick engagements before withdrawing to safety. These Hitondran tactics proved particularly effective against Japanese positions that had been located but not yet subjected to sustained attack. The intelligence value of Calliope attacks often exceeded their immediate tactical impact. The weapon's ability to force Japanese defenders out of concealed positions revealed the true extent of defensive complexes that conventional reconnaissance had failed to identify. Photography and observation during and after rocket barrages provided American commanders with detailed information about enemy positions, troop strength, and defensive capabilities that proved invaluable for planning subsequent operations. Japanese military diaries and captured documents from the Philippine campaign revealed a profound psychological impact the Calliope had on enemy forces. Many entries describe the weapon as representing American technological superiority in terms that suggested Japanese soldiers felt they were fighting an increasingly unwinnable war against an enemy that could continuously develop new methods of destruction. One particularly revealing captured document was a report from a Japanese regimental commander describing his unit's encounter with a Calliope attack. He wrote that his carefully prepared defensive positions, which had been designed to withstand prolonged bombardment, were rendered completely useless within minutes by a weapon his forces had no knowledge of and no defense against. The report concluded with a pessimistic assessment that American technological advantages were making effective resistance increasingly impossible. The physical evidence left behind after Calliope attacks supported these psychological assessments. American forces advancing through areas that had been subjected to rocket barrages found defensive positions that showed signs of hasty abandonment rather than systematic withdrawal. Equipment, weapons, and personal belongings were often left behind, suggesting that many Japanese defenders had fled their positions in panic rather than conducting the organized fighting withdrawals that characterized their usual defensive tactics. Medical reports from Japanese prisoners captured after Calliope attacks indicated high rates of what would today be recognized as symptoms of severe psychological trauma. Many prisoners exhibited signs of shell shock or combat stress reaction that exceeded what was typically seen among Japanese forces, who are generally noted for their discipline and resistance to psychological breakdown under fire. The weapon's impact on Japanese logistics and supply operations proved as significant as its direct battlefield effects. Many rocket barrages targeted suspected supply depots and communication centers, with the weapon's area saturation capability making it highly effective against these types of dispersed targets. Japanese supply officers reported increasing difficulty maintaining forward positions when their carefully concealed logistics sites could be rapidly destroyed by weapons they couldn't effectively defend against. Walker's personal accounts of Calliope operations reveal the complex emotions experienced by crews operating the weapon system. While the devastating effectiveness against enemy positions was undeniable, many tank commanders expressed concerns about the impersonal nature of the weapon and its impact on both enemy forces and civilian populations in areas where combat was taking place. The precision required for effective Calliope operations led to the development of specialized intelligence gathering techniques focused on identifying high-value targets that justified the use of the weapon's limited ammunition supply. Reconnaissance teams spent increasing amounts of time locating and mapping Japanese defensive positions, with particular emphasis on identifying command centers, ammunition storage areas, and communication facilities that could be effectively engaged with rocket barrages. Coordination between Calliope-equipped units and other American forces required new communication procedures and tactical planning methods. The weapon's brief but intensive firing sequence had to be carefully integrated with artillery barrages, airstrikes, and infantry movements to maximize its impact while avoiding friendly fire incidents. This coordination proved particularly challenging in the dense jungle terrain of the Philippines, where maintaining visual and radio contact between different units was often difficult. The maintenance requirements for Calliope systems in tropical combat conditions presented unique challenges for American logistics personnel. The rocket rack assemblies were susceptible to corrosion from salt air and humidity, while the electrical firing systems required protection from moisture that could cause misfires or premature detonation. Specialized maintenance teams were trained to service the weapons under field conditions, but the complexity of the systems meant that minor problems could render the entire weapon ineffective. Training programs for Calliope crews emphasized the unique characteristics of rocket artillery compared to conventional tank gunnery. Unlike the precisely aimed fire of a tank's main gun, the Calliope delivered area saturation bombardment that required different target selection criteria and firing procedures. Crews had to learn to calculate the optimal firing positions and angles to achieve maximum coverage of target areas, while ensuring that rockets cleared friendly forces and terrain obstacles. The psychological preparation of crews for Calliope operations proved as important as technical training. The weapon's devastating impact on enemy positions and the inevitable civilian casualties in areas where Japanese forces had positioned themselves among non-combatant populations created ethical dilemmas that many American soldiers found difficult to process. Military chaplains and medical personnel worked to help crews cope with the psychological stress of operating such a destructive weapon system. Japanese intelligence efforts to understand and counter the Calliope weapon intensified as more units encountered it during the Philippine campaign. Captured American equipment and interrogation of prisoners provided some technical information about the weapon's capabilities, but Japanese forces lacked the industrial capacity to develop effective countermeasures or similar weapons of their own. This technological gap contributed to a growing sense among Japanese military leaders that they were fighting a losing battle against an enemy whose scientific and industrial advantages were becoming insurmountable. The documentation of Calliope attacks in American military records provides detailed information about the weapon's tactical employment and effectiveness. After-action reports consistently noted the high success rate of operations that included rocket barrages, with significantly reduced American casualties and faster achievement of tactical objectives compared to conventional attacks against similar positions. Statistical analysis of Calliope operations during the Philippine campaign revealed that positions subjected to rocket bombardment were typically overrun within hours rather than the days or weeks required for conventional assaults against similar fortifications. This acceleration of tactical progress had strategic implications for the overall Pacific campaign, allowing American forces to maintain momentum and preventing Japanese forces from establishing the prolonged defensive battles they needed to make American advances prohibitively costly. The limited production run of Calliope systems meant that their impact on the war was more psychological and tactical than strategic. However, the weapons served as a preview of the technological advantages that American industry was capable of producing when focused on solving specific military problems. The success of the Calliope program encouraged further experimentation with specialized weapons systems designed to overcome particular challenges of Pacific warfare. As American forces prepared for what many expected to be the final assault on Japan itself, the lessons learned from Calliope operations influenced planning for weapons and tactics that would be needed to overcome the massive defensive preparations the Japanese were constructing on their home islands. The weapon's effectiveness against fortified positions suggested that American technological advantages might be able to reduce the enormous casualties that military planners anticipated for an invasion of SIAM. Japan. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the Pacific War before the full impact of weapons like the Calliope could be realized in large-scale operations. However, the psychological and tactical lessons learned from the weapons deployment in the Philippines provided valuable insights into how technological advantages could be leveraged to overcome even the most determined defensive efforts. In the final analysis, the M4 Sherman Calliope represented more than just an innovative weapon system. It symbolized America's ability to adapt existing technology to meet new challenges and demonstrated the psychological impact that superior technology could have on enemy forces. For Japanese defenders who encountered the weapon, it served as a grim reminder that their enemies could always develop new methods of warfare that their own forces were unable to match or counter effectively. The legacy of the Calliope extended beyond its immediate tactical impact to influence post-war development of multiple launch rocket systems and area saturation weapons that would become standard equipment for modern military forces. The lessons learned about coordinating rocket artillery with other weapon systems and the importance of psychological warfare in modern combat continued to influence military doctrine long after the last WWII Calliope had been retired from service. Captain Walker's experiences with the Calliope system during the Philippine campaign exemplified the broader transformation of warfare that was taking place in the Pacific theater. The conflict was no longer simply a matter of courage and determination, but increasingly a contest of industrial capacity, technological innovation, and the ability to adapt new weapons and tactics faster than Packard. The enemy. For the Japanese forces who faced the terrifying bombardment of 60 rockets, launched simultaneously from what appeared to be a conventional tank, the message was clear. In modern warfare, technological superiority could overcome even the most determined resistance and the most carefully prepared defenses. The story of the Sherman Calliope serves as a reminder that innovation in warfare often comes from unexpected combinations of existing technology rather than revolutionary new developments. By mounting a simple rocket launcher on a reliable tank chassis, American engineers created a weapon that fundamentally changed the tactical balance in Pacific combat operations. The psychological impact on Japanese forces, revealed through captured documents and prisoner interrogations, demonstrated that the mere existence of such weapons could be as important as their actual deployment in breaking enemy morale and resistance. As the war in the Pacific reached its conclusion, the Calliope had achieved its primary objective not through massive production numbers or widespread deployment, but through its demonstration that American industrial and technological capabilities could continuously produce new solutions to battlefield challenges. For Japanese military planners already struggling with resource shortages and industrial degradation, the appearance of weapons like the Calliope represented a technological gap that was growing wider rather than narrower as the war progressed. The 60 rockets that Captain Walker unleashed on that misty morning in the Philippines carried a message that extended far beyond their immediate destructive impact. American innovation and industrial capacity would continue to find new ways to bring overwhelming force to bear against any defensive position the enemy could construct. The development of specialized tactics for Calliope employment required extensive field testing and refinement throughout the Philippine campaign. Walker and other commanders discovered that the weapon's effectiveness varied dramatically depending on terrain, weather conditions, and the specific nature of Japanese defensive positions. Dense jungle canopy could prematurely detonate rockets before they reached their intended targets, while rocky terrain could create dangerous ricochets that endangered friendly forces. These challenges led to the development of detailed target selection criteria that maximized the weapon's effectiveness while minimizing risks to American personnel. Weather conditions played a crucial role in Calliope operations, with humidity and rain affecting both the reliability of the electrical firing systems and the trajectory of the rockets themselves. Monsoon conditions that were common in the Philippines created particular challenges, as moisture could cause electrical failures in the firing circuits, while strong winds could blow rockets off course. Maintenance crews developed specialized procedures for protecting the weapon systems during adverse weather, including waterproof covers and desiccant materials to prevent moisture damage to sensitive components. The logistics of supplying Calliope operations extended far beyond simply delivering rockets to forward positions. Each rocket required individual inspection and testing to ensure proper functioning, as defective rounds could cause catastrophic failures that endangered the entire tank crew. Quality control procedures developed specifically for rocket ammunition included checks of electrical connections, propellant stability, and warhead integrity that had to be performed under field conditions with limited equipment and facilities. Training programs for Calliope crews evolved rapidly as experience revealed the unique demands of operating the weapon system. Initial training had focused primarily on the technical aspects of loading and firing the rockets, but field experience demonstrated that successful employment required understanding of trajectory calculations, target analysis, and coordination with other military units that went far beyond conventional tank gunnery. Advanced training courses were established to teach these specialized skills, with experienced commanders like Walker serving as instructors for newly assigned crews. The psychological warfare aspects of Calliope operations became increasingly important as American intelligence officers recognized the weapon's impact on Japanese morale. Propaganda efforts began incorporating references to the devastating rocket attacks, with leaflets dropped on Japanese positions, describing the futility of resistance against American technological superiority. These psychological operations were coordinated with actual Calliope attacks to maximize their impact on enemy morale and encourage surrender rather than continued resistance. Japanese attempts to develop counterpropaganda against American technological advantages met with limited success, partly because the physical evidence of weapons like the Calliope was so overwhelming. Denial was impossible. Captured Japanese propaganda materials revealed increasing desperation in their attempts to maintain troop morale in the face of American weapons that seemed to represent insurmountable technological advantages. Some Japanese propaganda even began acknowledging American technological superiority while attempting to frame continued resistance in terms of honor and duty rather than realistic chances of victory. The intelligence gathering requirements for effective Calliope employment led to the development of specialized reconnaissance techniques focused on identifying targets that justified the use of the weapon's limited ammunition supply. Photo reconnaissance missions were conducted specifically to locate and map Japanese defensive positions, with particular attention to identifying command bunkers, ammunition storage areas, and communication facilities that could be effectively engaged with rocket barrages. These reconnaissance efforts often revealed that Japanese defensive complexes were far more extensive than initial estimates had suggested. Ground reconnaissance teams were trained in specific observation techniques for identifying Calliope targets, learning to recognize the subtle signs that indicated the presence of underground facilities, or camouflaged positions. These teams operated far forward of American lines, often spending days in dangerous territory to gather the detailed intelligence needed to plan effective rocket attacks. The information they provided was crucial for ensuring that limited rocket ammunition was used against targets that would have maximum impact on Japanese defensive capabilities. The coordination between Calliope operations and other American weapons systems required the development of new communication procedures and timing protocols. Rocket barrages had to be precisely synchronized with artillery fire and airstrikes to achieve maximum effectiveness, while ensuring that American infantry units were positioned to take advantage of the confusion and destruction created by the bombardment. These coordination requirements led to the establishment of specialized fire coordination centers that could manage multiple weapon systems simultaneously. Radio communication procedures for Calliope operations had to account for the unique characteristics of rocket artillery, including the brief but intensive firing sequence and the need for immediate damage assessment to determine whether follow-up attacks were necessary. Special code words and timing sequences were developed to ensure clear communication between Calliope crews, infantry commanders, and supporting units during the rapid sequence of events that characterized rocket attacks. The maintenance and repair of Calliope systems in forward areas presented challenges that were unique among American armored vehicles. The complex rocket rack assemblies included hundreds of electrical connections, mechanical components, and structural elements that were subject to battle damage, wear, and environmental degradation. Field maintenance teams had to be trained in specialized repair techniques that went far beyond conventional tank maintenance, often requiring them to fabricate replacement parts using limited resources and equipment available in forward areas. Spare parts supply for Calliope systems became a critical logistical challenge, as many components were unique to the weapon system and could not be cannibalized from other equipment. Supply officers had to maintain inventories of specialized electrical components, rocket rack parts, and testing equipment that were not needed for any other weapons in the American arsenal. The complexity of this supply chain meant that Calliope units often had to operate with reduced capability when specific components were not available. The evolution of Japanese defensive tactics in response to Calliope attacks demonstrated the adaptability of Japanese military engineering, even under the severe resource constraints they faced by 19WWII. 44. Japanese engineers began designing defensive positions with multiple redundant systems and dispersed layouts that could better survive the area saturation bombardment that characterized rocket attacks. These new designs required significantly more time and materials to construct, but offered improved survivability against the concentrated firepower that American forces could bring to bear. Japanese attempts to develop early warning systems for rocket attacks met with limited success, as the brief time between launching and impact left little opportunity for effective countermeasures. Some Japanese positions began using sound detection equipment, originally designed for artillery spotting. But the simultaneous launch of 60 rockets created acoustic signatures that were difficult to distinguish from other battlefield noise until the impacts began. More effective was the development of camouflage and deception techniques designed to prevent American reconnaissance from identifying high-value targets that justified rocket attacks. The medical treatment of casualties from Calliope attacks required American medical personnel to develop new procedures for handling the unique types of injuries caused by concentrated rocket bombardment. The simultaneous impact of multiple high-explosive warheads created blast effects and debris patterns that were different from those caused by conventional artillery or bombing attacks. Medical units had to stock specialized supplies for treating the severe burns, concussion injuries, and psychological trauma that characterized casualties from rocket attacks. Japanese medical personnel faced even greater challenges in treating their own casualties from Calliope attacks, as their limited medical supplies and facilities were often inadequate for handling the severe injuries caused by concentrated rocket bombardment. Captured Japanese medical reports described casualty rates from rocket attacks that were significantly higher than those from conventional bombardment, with particular emphasis on the difficulty of treating multiple simultaneous casualties with limited resources and under continued threat of additional attacks. The industrial production of Calliope systems represented a significant achievement for American manufacturing, requiring the integration of components from multiple industries including automotive, electrical, and ordnance manufacturing. The rocket rack assemblies required precision machining and assembly that competed with other high-priority military production programs, while the electrical firing systems demanded components and materials that were also needed for radar and communication equipment. Balancing these competing demands required careful coordination between military procurement offices and industrial manufacturers. Quality control procedures for Calliope production were more stringent than those for conventional military equipment, as the complexity of the weapon system and the dangerous nature of rocket ammunition required extensive testing and inspection at every stage of manufacturing. Each completed system underwent comprehensive testing that included electrical system checks, mechanical stress tests, and live fire exercises that consumed significant amounts of ammunition and SLI resources. These quality control measures were essential for ensuring crew safety and weapon effectiveness, but added substantially to production costs and time requirements. The training infrastructure required to support Calliope operations represented a significant investment in specialized facilities and personnel. Training ranges had to be designed with safety zones large enough to accommodate the dispersed impact pattern of 60 rockets, while training ammunition had to be manufactured specifically for instruction purposes, since live warheads could not be safely used in training exercises. Instructor training programs were established to prepare experienced personnel to teach the specialized skills required for effective Calliope employment. Advanced tactical training for Calliope crews included simulated combat exercises that replicated the conditions they would encounter in Pacific operations, including coordination with infantry units, communication with supporting forces, and rapid deployment and withdrawal procedures. These training exercises often revealed problems with equipment, procedures, or tactics that had not been anticipated during initial development, leading to continuous refinement of both the weapon system and the CI methods for employing it effectively. The psychological impact of Calliope operations on American forces was generally positive, as crews appreciated having access to such overwhelming firepower against Japanese defensive positions that had previously seemed nearly impregnable. However, some personnel expressed concerns about the indiscriminate nature of area saturation bombardment and its potential impact on civilian populations in areas where combat was taking place. Military chaplains and psychological support personnel worked to help crews process these ethical concerns while maintaining their effectiveness in combat operations. The morale boost provided by Calliope operations extended beyond the crews who operated the weapon, to include infantry and other supporting units who benefited from the devastating preparatory bombardments. American infantry reported significantly reduced casualties and faster achievement of objectives when their attacks were preceded by rocket barrages. leading to widespread appreciation for the weapon among ground forces who had previously faced the daunting task of assaulting well-prepared Japanese defensive positions with conventional weapons alone. Intelligence analysis of Japanese communications intercepts revealed the profound impact that Calliope operations had on enemy command and control systems. Japanese commanders frequently reported complete loss of communication with forward units following rocket attacks, as the concentrated bombardment destroyed radio equipment, killed operators, and severed telephone lines that connected defensive positions. This disruption of communications had effects that extended far beyond the immediate target area, as Japanese commanders lost the ability to coordinate defensive responses or call for reinforcements. The strategic implications of communication disruption caused by Calliope attacks were particularly significant in the context of Japanese defensive doctrine, which relied heavily on coordinated response to American assaults. When rocket bombardment severed the communication links that enabled this coordination, Japanese defensive positions became isolated and vulnerable to defeat in detail by American forces that maintained effective communication and coordination between their various units. Japanese attempts to develop hardened communication systems that could survive rocket attacks met with limited success due to resource constraints and the LAS. Technical challenges of creating electronics that could withstand the overpressure and fragmentation effects of concentrated high-explosive bombardment. Some Japanese units experimented with buried telephone lines and redundant radio systems, but the time and materials required for these installations often exceeded what was available to forward defensive positions. The psychological warfare value of Calliope operations was enhanced by the weapon's distinctive visual and auditory signature, which created lasting impressions on both enemy forces and civilian populations who witnessed the attacks. The sight of 60 rockets launching simultaneously from what appeared to be a conventional tank was so unusual that it often took observers several seconds to process what they were seeing, followed by the overwhelming impact of 60 simultaneous explosions that created unforgettable impressions of American firepower. Sound recordings made during Calliope attacks revealed acoustic signatures that were unlike anything else on the battlefield, with the initial launch sequence creating a distinctive crescendo of rocket motor ignitions, followed by the rolling thunder of multiple simultaneous impacts. These recordings were later used in psychological warfare broadcasts to Japanese positions, with the implication that similar attacks could be expected if resistance continued. The documentation of Calliope attacks in both American and Japanese military records provides detailed insight into the weapon's tactical and psychological effectiveness. American after-action reports consistently noted the high success rate of operations that included rocket bombardments, while captured Japanese documents described the devastating impact of weapons that their forces had no knowledge of and no defense against. This documentation served as valuable feedback for refining both the technical characteristics of the weapon and the tactics for employing it effectively. Statistical analysis of Calliope operations during the Philippine campaign revealed patterns of effectiveness that varied depending on target type, terrain conditions, and tactical employment methods. Rocket attacks against bunker complexes showed the highest success rates, while attacks against dispersed positions or targets in heavily forested areas were less effective. This data was used to develop targeting priorities that maximized the impact of limited rocket ammunition supplies. The evolution of Calliope tactics throughout the Philippine campaign demonstrated the importance of continuous learning and adaptation in modern warfare. Initial employment methods that had been developed during training proved inadequate for actual combat conditions, requiring rapid modification of procedures, communication protocols, and coordination methods. The ability to quickly identify and correct these deficiencies was crucial for maximizing the weapon's effectiveness and minimizing risks to American personnel. Field modifications to Calliope systems were common throughout their operational history, as crews and maintenance personnel identified improvements that could enhance performance or reliability under combat conditions. These modifications ranged from simple changes to loading procedures to more complex alterations of electrical systems and mechanical components. The cumulative effect of these field improvements significantly enhanced the weapon's effectiveness compared to the original factory specifications. The legacy of Calliope operations extended far beyond their immediate tactical impact to influence post-war development of multiple launch rocket systems and area saturation weapons that became standard air equipment for modern military forces. The lessons learned about coordinating rocket artillery with other weapons systems, the importance of accurate target intelligence, and the psychological impact of concentrated bombardment continued to influence military doctrine long after the last Calliope had been retired from service. Research and development programs initiated during the war to improve rocket artillery capabilities led to significant advances in propellant technology, guidance systems, and warhead design that found applications in both military and civilian sectors. The industrial experience gained from Calliope production contributed to American capabilities in rocket and missile technology that proved crucial during the post-war period when ballistic missiles became central to national defense strategy. The international impact of Calliope operations was significant, as other Allied nations observed American success with mobile rocket artillery and began developing similar capabilities for their own forces. British, Canadian, and Australian military observers who witnessed Calliope attacks in the Philippines provided detailed reports that influenced their country's post-war military equipment programs and tactical doctrine development. Soviet military intelligence also closely monitored American rocket artillery development, with particular interest in the tactical employment methods that had proven successful against Japanese defensive positions. This intelligence contributed to Soviet development of multiple launch rocket systems that became a distinctive characteristic of their military forces during the Cold War period, demonstrating the far-reaching influence of innovations developed for Pacific warfare. The technical challenges overcome during Calliope development contributed to broader advances in American military technology, including improvements in electrical systems for military vehicles, precision manufacturing techniques for rocket components, and quality control procedures for complex weapons systems. These advances found applications in numerous other military programs and helped establish American technological leadership in areas that proved crucial for post-war national security requirements. The human cost of developing and deploying weapons like the Calliope was significant, including both American personnel who were killed or wounded while operating the systems and Japanese defenders who became casualties of the devastating bombardments. The ethical implications of area saturation weapons continued to be debated long after the war ended, with military ethicists and historians examining the balance between military effectiveness and humanitarian considerations in the development and employment of such weapons. Training accidents during Calliope development and deployment resulted in American casualties that highlighted the inherent dangers of working with high-explosive rocket ammunition and complex electrical firing systems. These accidents led to improved safety procedures and training methods that reduced risks to personnel while maintaining the intensive training standards required for effective weapon employment. The lessons learned from these accidents contributed to safety protocols for handling dangerous military equipment that remained in use long after the Calliope itself was retired. The environmental impact of Calliope operations in the Philippines was substantial, with rocket bombardments contributing to deforestation and soil contamination that affected local ecosystems for bass. Years after the war ended, unexploded rockets remained a hazard to civilian populations long after hostilities ceased, requiring extensive clearance operations that continued well into the post-war period. These environmental consequences became an important consideration in the development of military environmental policies and cleanup procedures for areas affected by intensive combat operations. The social and cultural impact of Calliope operations on Filipino civilian populations was complex, with reactions ranging from appreciation for American efforts to liberate the islands from Japanese occupation to concern about the destructive effects of intensive warfare on local communities. Oral histories collected from Filipino civilians who witnessed rocket attacks provide valuable insights into the human impact of technological warfare and the lasting impressions created by pinko demonstrations of overwhelming military power. Economic analysis of Calliope production and operation revealed the substantial costs associated with developing and deploying specialized weapons systems, including not only the direct costs of manufacturing and ammunition, but also the indirect costs of training, logistics support, and maintenance infrastructure. These cost analyses provided valuable data for post-war military planning and procurement decisions, helping to establish methodologies for evaluating the cost-effectiveness of complex weapons systems. The international legal implications of area saturation weapons like the Calliope became a subject of study for military lawyers and international relations specialists who examined the weapons employment in the context of existing laws of war and humanitarian principles. These studies contributed to the development of international agreements regarding the use of weapons with wide area effects and helped establish precedents for evaluating new weapons technologies against humanitarian law requirements. As the final American operations in the Philippines drew to a close, the success of Calliope employment against Japanese defensive positions had demonstrated the potential for technological innovation to overcome even the most determined resistance. The weapon's impact extended far beyond its immediate battlefield effects to influence military doctrine, industrial development, and international relations in ways that continued to shape global affairs long after the war ended. For the Japanese forces who had faced the terrifying bombardment of 60 rockets launched from what appeared to be an ordinary tank, the Calliope represented a technological revolution that made their traditional defensive methods obsolete and highlighted the growing gap between American industrial capabilities and those of their enemies. The final assessment of Calliope operations in the Pacific Theater revealed a weapon system that had achieved far more than its original designers had envisioned, serving not only as an effective tactical weapon but also as a symbol of American technological superiority and industrial capacity. That contributed significantly to the eventual Japanese decision to surrender rather than continue a war they could no longer hope to win. The technical evolution of the Calliope system throughout its operational deployment demonstrated the rapid pace of innovation that characterized American military development during the later stages of the Pacific War. Field reports from commanders like Captain Walker led to continuous modifications of the rocket rack design, electrical firing systems, and ammunition handling procedures that significantly improved the weapons reliability and effectiveness. These improvements were often implemented through field modification kits that could be installed by maintenance personnel at forward positions, allowing existing Calliope tanks to benefit from the latest technical advances without requiring return to depot-level facilities. Engineering teams assigned specifically to Calliope development worked closely with field commanders to identify and resolve operational problems as they arose. This close cooperation between designers and users resulted in an unusually rapid cycle of improvement that kept the weapons system ahead of Japanese countermeasures and environmental challenges. The feedback loop between field experience and technical development became a model for future weapons programs, demonstrating the importance of maintaining close connections between research facilities and operational units. The manufacturing challenges associated with Calliope production extended beyond the immediate technical requirements to include workforce training, material allocation, and production scheduling that had to be coordinated with numerous other high-priority military programs. Factory workers had to learn specialized assembly techniques for rocket rack components, while quality control inspectors required training in electrical testing procedures that were unlike anything used for conventional military equipment. The complexity of these training requirements meant that Calliope production could only be assigned to facilities with highly skilled workforces and sophisticated manufacturing capabilities. Material shortages that affected all American military production during 1944 and 1945 had particular impact on Calliope manufacturing. As the weapon required specialized steel alloys for rocket tube construction and rare metals for electrical components that were also needed for radar and communication equipment, procurement officers had to carefully balance competing requirements for these scarce materials, often making difficult decisions about production priorities that affected multiple weapons programs. Simultaneously, the strategic deployment of Calliope-equipped units required careful consideration of shipping space, maintenance support, and tactical requirements that competed with other military priorities in the resource-constrained environment of Pacific operations. Each Calliope tank required additional shipping space for rocket ammunition and spare parts, while the specialized maintenance requirements meant that support personnel with unique training had to be assigned to BS units equipped with the weapon. These logistical considerations limited the number of units that could be equipped with Calliope systems and influenced decisions about where and when the weapons would be employed. Theater commanders had to make difficult choices about allocating limited numbers of Calliope tanks among competing operational requirements, with priority typically given to the most challenging assault missions where conventional weapons had proven inadequate. This selective deployment meant that many American units never encountered the weapon system, while others became dependent on its capabilities for overcoming particularly difficult Japanese defensive positions. The intelligence value of Calliope operations extended beyond immediate tactical benefits to provide strategic insight into Japanese defensive capabilities, morale, and decision-making processes. Analysis of Japanese responses to rocket attacks revealed patterns of behavior and tactical adaptations that provided valuable information about enemy strengths and vulnerabilities. This intelligence contributed to broader understanding of Japanese military capabilities that influenced planning for subsequent operations throughout the Pacific theater. Captured Japanese technical personnel, who had observed Calliope attacks, provided detailed information about enemy assessments of American technological capabilities and the impact these assessments had on Bren. Japanese strategic planning. Interrogation reports revealed that Japanese military leaders were increasingly concerned about their inability to match American technological developments, with particular emphasis on their lack of industrial capacity to develop equivalent weapon systems. The psychological operations value of Calliope attacks was systematically exploited through coordinated propaganda campaigns that used descriptions and photographs of rocket bombardments to encourage Japanese surrender and discourage continued resistance. These propaganda efforts were carefully timed to coincide with actual Calliope operations, creating a synergistic effect that amplified both the physical and psychological impact of the weapon system on enemy forces. Leaflet drops following Calliope attacks often included technical descriptions of the weapon's capabilities and warnings about future bombardments, designed to create anxiety among Japanese defenders about the possibility of facing similar attacks. The effectiveness of these psychological operations was documented through interrogation of prisoners, who reported widespread discussion among Japanese forces about American rocket weapons and their devastating effects on defensive positions. The medical challenges associated with treating casualties from Calliope attacks led to significant advances in trauma surgery and emergency medical procedures that found applications far beyond military medicine. The concentrated nature of rocket bombardments created casualty patterns that required new approaches to triage, surgical intervention, and rehabilitation that pushed the boundaries of contemporary medical knowledge and capabilities. American military medical personnel developed specialized protocols for treating the blast injuries, burns, and psychological trauma that characterized casualties from rocket attacks. These protocols included innovative surgical techniques, new medications for treating severe burns, and psychological support procedures that were later adapted for treating combat stress reactions from other types of intensive bombardment. The medical advances developed for treating Calliope casualties contributed to improved survival rates and reduced long-term disabilities among wounded personnel. Japanese medical facilities faced overwhelming challenges in treating their own casualties from rocket attacks, as their limited supplies and equipment were inadequate for handling the severe injuries caused by concentrated high-explosive bombardment. Captured Japanese medical reports described casualty rates that often exceeded their ability to provide effective treatment, with particular difficulties in treating multiple simultaneous casualties, with critical injuries requiring immediate surgical intervention. The humanitarian implications of area saturation weapons like the Calliope became a subject of ongoing debate among military ethicists, religious leaders, and international legal experts who examine the weapons employment in the context of existing moral and legal frameworks governing warfare. These discussions contributed to the development of international humanitarian law principles that continue to influence decisions about weapons development and employment in modern conflicts. Military chaplains assigned to units employing Calliope systems reported increased requests for counseling and spiritual guidance from personnel who were struggling with the ethical implications of operating, quote, such devastating weapons. These requests led to the development of specialized pastoral care programs designed to help military personnel process the moral complexities of modern technological warfare while maintaining their effectiveness in combat operations. The post-war analysis of Calliope operations provided valuable data for evaluating the effectiveness of different tactical employment methods and their impact on both enemy forces and friendly casualties. Statistical studies revealed correlations between specific tactical techniques and operational success rates that influenced the development of doctrine for future rocket artillery systems and area saturation weapons. Comparative analysis of conventional artillery bombardments versus Calliope attacks showed significant differences in effectiveness against fortified positions, with rocket bombardments achieving higher rates of position neutralization and reduced American casualties during follow-up infantry assaults. These findings contributed to military doctrine that emphasized the value of concentrated firepower delivered in short time periods rather than prolonged bombardments that gave enemy forces time to adapt and recover. The technological innovations developed for Calliope systems found applications in numerous post-war military and civilian programs, including improvements in electrical systems for vehicles, precision manufacturing techniques for mechanical components, and safety procedures for handling dangerous materials. These spin-off benefits from military research and development demonstrated the broader value of investing in advanced weapons technology, even when the immediate military applications were limited. Research conducted to improve rocket propellants for Calliope ammunition led to advances in chemical engineering and materials science that contributed to developments in space exploration, commercial explosives, and industrial manufacturing processes. The interdisciplinary nature of this research created connections between military and civilian scientific communities that continue to generate innovations long after the original military requirements had been fulfilled. The international influence of Calliope operations extended to allied nations who observed American success with mobile rocket artillery and began developing similar capabilities for their own military forces. British military observers who witnessed rocket attacks in the Philippines provided detailed reports that influenced post-war British development of multiple launch rocket systems, while Australian forces incorporated lessons learned from Calliope employment into their own tactical doctrine and equipment procurement programs. Soviet intelligence services devoted significant resources to understanding American rocket artillery capabilities, with particular interest in the manufacturing techniques and tactical employment methods that had proven successful against Japanese defensive positions. This intelligence gathering contributed to Soviet development of rocket artillery systems that became a distinctive characteristic of their military forces during the Cold War period, demonstrating the lasting strategic impact of innovations originally developed for Pacific theater operations. The cultural impact of Calliope operations on American society was reflected in media coverage, veteran accounts, and popular culture representations that emphasized the technological superiority of American forces and the innovative solutions developed to overcome enemy resistance. These cultural narratives contributed to public understanding of American military capabilities and helped build support for continued investment in research and development programs that maintained crass technological advantages over potential adversaries. Veteran organizations representing personnel who had operated or been supported by Calliope systems became advocates for continued development of advanced military technologies, arguing that technological superiority was essential for minimizing American casualties in future conflicts. Their advocacy contributed to political support for military research programs that might otherwise have been reduced during post-war budget constraints. The academic study of Calliope operations contributed to the development of military history as a scholarly discipline, with researchers using the weapon system as a case study for examining the relationship between technological innovation and military effectiveness. These studies provided insights into the processes by which new technologies are developed, tested, and deployed in military organizations, contributing to broader understanding of innovation in complex conflict institutional environments. The preservation of Calliope tanks and related equipment in military museums created educational opportunities for future generations to understand the technological innovations that contributed to American victory in the Pacific War. Museum exhibits featuring the weapons system often emphasized the ingenuity and adaptability that characterized American military development, while also acknowledging the human cost of technological warfare for both American forces and their enemies. As historical perspective on the Pacific War continued to evolve, the Calliope system remained a powerful symbol of American technological achievement and the decisive impact that innovation could have on military key outcomes. The weapon's legacy extended far beyond its immediate tactical effectiveness to represent the broader transformation of warfare. Through technological advancement and industrial capacity that characterized the mid-20th century period of global conflict,